Today, I'm kitbashing 8 rarely seen Astra Militarum Regiments using only Games Workshop plastic parts. Alright, a couple of the builds do use a tiny bit of green stuff, but nothing complex, I promise. Let's kick things off with the Athonian Tunnel Rats, a regiment whose ranks are drawn from hive dwellers and sewer folk. I was tempted to base my builds on the Necromunda Ashwaste Nomads, but wanted a slightly more organised military feel, so went with Genestealer Cultists. To differentiate them from the purple-skinned folk, I decided to fill in the ridged armour plates. I roughly applied sprue goo first, and then used a little bit of Tamiya extra thin cement to smooth out the surface. This provided a very smooth final result that only needed a tiny amount of cleanup with a sanding stick. To further differentiate my model from the neophyte hybrids, and to give it more of an imperial feel, I opted for Cadian arms, which fit the cultist bodies very well. The head had me stumped for a little while, as I wanted something with a helmet, breathing apparatus and not Cadian. So I stumped for a Tempestus Scion head, which I think does the trick. The artwork has a cloak, so my guy's getting a cloak. And this started with a paper template cut to shape to act as a guide for the green stuff. I'm no sculptor, but I managed to make this work by rolling a thin sheet of green stuff onto a surface coated with Vaseline. The template was used to cut out the shape, and thanks to the Vaseline it came away cleanly. And after a bit of gentle persuasion, I had the sort of raggedy cloak that I felt was befitting of these tunnel dwellers. And I'm pretty pleased with the finished model. With the ubiquity and low cost of spare Cadian bits, I don't think it'd be too outrageous to make a full army of tunnel rats, though the Scion heads could prove difficult en masse, so a third-party head would perhaps be a better choice. As the name suggests, the Skull Takers are a brutish lot. Borderline feral in fact, with an affinity for close combat, and if this old piece of artwork's anything to go by, shirtlessness. For these undomesticated Catachan-esque folk, I chose the Chaos Cultist kit, obviously. These are some of the best human models that Games Workshop's ever made in my opinion, though they do need a thorough course of despikification if you want to use them outside of the realm of chaos. I also filled in a Chaos Undivided symbol with sprue goo, but forgot to film it, so here's some stock footage of a toucan. Since the Skull Takers favour close combat, I was happy to keep the obviously not standard issue machete and substitute the auto pistol for something a little bit more zappy. After browsing through my own skull collection, I opted for this battle-hardened head from the Scions kit. The armoured neck joint did need removing to fit the mostly bare torso, and to ensure a nice smooth fit, I threw a bit of sprue goo into the neck to act as both glue and filler, which is something it's rather good at. To lean a little further into the feral aesthetic, I crafted a pelt from some green stuff, using this texture plate that I've had for years, and sorry I can't remember the source. It does a pretty decent job as long as you make sure to apply a thin layer of Vaseline, otherwise the green stuff tends to get stuck in the very fine recesses. Thankfully, it does pretty much all of the hard work, and after some friendly prodding and poking, I had myself a finished Skull Taker. This might be my favourite build of the lot. It's characterful and, in my opinion, fairly unique. But on the flip side, I think it would be really impractical to make anything bigger than a kill team with this method, which is a real shame. Now, when Games Workshop gets around to making some Catachans... The Indigan Praefects? Who knows, there's an extraneous A in there. These guys hail from a man-made death world plagued by megafauna, so they're experienced xeno-hunters and a little bit purple. I took a lot of inspiration from this old studio kitbash, starting with the armoured torso from a Tempestus Scion. To make this play well with other human parts, I removed the tassets, which, well, they're a bit daft, and the antenna, which I think ruined the silhouette of the model. Once again, the Neophyte Hybrid kit provided the legs, though I did have to remove all of that troubling Genestealer business. This is easily done with a sharp knife and cleans up nicely with fine sanding sticks and a fiberglass pencil. The legs were fettled to fit nicely into the torso before switching my attention to the arms. The Codex build uses Neophyte hybrid arms, but that looks a little law enforcement for my taste, so once again, Cadia provides. As with the OG model, the head comes from a Skitarii Vanguard, which is an unusual choice, but it really looks the part, and the build is rounded out with a Scion backpack with the wiring for the hotshot lasgun removed. Another straightforward build, and one I've wanted to do for years. The addition of the new, finer scaled Cadian arms really helps the proportions of the finished model, which are much less action hero and more expendable cannon fodder. But as much as I like it, there's no getting away from the fact that this is a pricey build, especially as Scions only come in boxes of 5. So unless you're one of these guys, perhaps it's best contained to Kill Team. Children on Jopall are born into debt, and the bill they owe their government only increases as they grow and use precious resources. Military service in the indentured squadrons is one of the few ways of repaying that debt, which is pretty dang grimdark. We don't have any recent artwork of the Jopall Indentured, so I'm going for a no expense spent aesthetic. So my guardsman wears standard issue kit without any of the fancy add-ons like webbing, pouches, grenades or knee pads. These were carefully cut away and the surface is cleaned by scraping with the side of a fresh scalpel blade. I even removed the pouches from the jacket, surmising that the powers that be could save a few cents of material by ordering fatigues without pockets. Once the trooper was thoroughly robbed of anything that wasn't nailed on, the basic parts were assembled. I chose the pattern of lasgun that looks a bit like a Garand rather than one of the new expensive looking models, and added a bolt head because, well, I was watching Alien 3 at the time. Removing the webbing pouches on the side of the model leaves a gap in the belt, which I replaced with a thin strip of green stuff, which isn't very interesting to watch, so let's have a look at the finished model. I really like this one. It's like a Cadian, but less. Removing the knee pads from the new Cadian models really improves their look in my opinion, which is something I'll bear in mind in future builds. Now I think I went the wrong way with the colour scheme, which took inspiration from this classic image, but with subdued colours, and it just ended up looking a bit Cadian for my tastes. Oh well. Terrax churns out the finest commissars, stormtroopers and other Imperial agents, and the Terrax Guard have been referred to as almost an entire regiment of commissars, so that's the questionable foundation for this build, which started life as a plastic Krieg trooper. Once I'd assembled most of the model, I sawed off the top half as I had grander plans for the upper torso. Imperial tank commanders make for excellent commissar proxies, so I freed this Baneblade commander from his burdensome tank-bound legs. The Krieg legs and commander torso are an excellent match, needing no remedial work to fit. And the same goes for the Cadian arms. I chose a chainsword because I wanted to do a very 90s paint job on this guy, including some preposterous hazard stripes. The role of Commissar Head was deftly played by the tank commander from the Baneblade, which makes sense really, though there are plenty of other officer models out there with the correct hat. And that's that. As a one-off this works, but sourcing the parts for even a kill team would likely prove to be a nightmare. But the concept works really well for a Commissar Kitbash, which is arguably more useful. The Harakoni Warhawks are another throwback to the turn of the millennium and the version 3.5 Imperial Guard Codex. They're cool, elite, special op types, so this one should be pretty straightforward. The obvious starting point is the Kasakin, which sport more modern, tactical looking armour than the Space World War II Cadians, and the kit also sports some nice, sneaky operator-like poses. I ditched the hotshot lasgun for a vanilla version from the Cadian box and flattened off the Toblerone bits on the top of the receiver to make room for a scope, which I retrieved from the hotshot lasgun that I didn't use, but I think any optic would look the part here to be honest. After giving this Warhawk some limbs, I turned my attention to the backpack. I felt that a Kasakin pack probably wouldn't have been distinctive enough, and after trying a few options, I like the look of this Deathcore setup, which reminds me of the old Cadian Voxcaster pack. Once again, I made use of a Tempestus Scion head to help subdue the Cadia vibes, and because, well, I just think they're neat. And that's about it for my Harakoni Warhawk. Nice and simple, and probably pretty achievable for a full army project, if you've got a decent bit supplier to get hold of a few hundred Cadian limbs. This group of mysterious robe-wearing space station dwellers gives me the perfect excuse to use those mag boots from the Breachers box. I know the artwork doesn't have them, but I've been rewatching The Expanse, so what choice did I have? The multi-part Breacher torsos sport a longer coat, which is close enough for government work, but they do need to be fully assembled before bifurcation can commence. Like the old studio conversion, I'm going with a Cadian torso. Unlike the old studio conversion, I'm using the new model, which depending on the pose, may or may not have a lower back. So I cut a piece of 1mm styrene sheet to fit, and filled the gaps with a little sprue goo, and introduced it to the Breacher's legs. I decided to give this guy a plasma pistol, mainly because I was getting bored of lasguns. So I assembled this 3-piece arm from Cadian parts to get the pose I wanted. Honestly, the pin is probably unnecessary, but better safe than sorry, I guess. An attitude that I imagine this Redcowl follows, what with a chainsaw and all. The old studio conversion uses what I think is a long out of production Wood Elf Ranger head with a rebreather grafted onto the front. But I'm going with a Skitarii head since it's more in scale with the modern kits that I've used for the rest of the build, and it's, actually available. Anyway, here's the finished Miasman Redcowl. If you wanted, you could probably make do with Cadian legs, less than knee pads, which I think would make these guys a much more approachable army project. But you do lose the longer coat, which I think is an important part of the look. And on that note, if I hadn't wanted the mag boots so badly, I would have probably started the build with a Deathcore Trooper for the legs. And that's all of them, like some sort of cannon fodder Super Friends. Those of you with the ability to count or functional short-term memory will note that I've only covered 7 of the builds here. And truth be told, I started editing together the section on the Royal Volpone build and decided that I thought the miniature was a bit rubbish. So let's pretend that didn't happen, and if you want to build your own Blue Blood, don't do it the way I did. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the other builds. It'd be weird if you'd made it this far on a hate watch, but props if you did, I guess.